Well, I have to admit, I'm a little nervous here this morning because I think that the Basil girls are out to get my job here. They've done such a good job. So yeah, congratulations to both of the Basil girls. Last week, as Father Leon and I were preparing for this Sunday Scout liturgy, Father Leon said, well, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be out on vacation. And he said, you're a scout. You've been a scout all your life. Why don't you preach Scout Sunday? I said, no problem. I've preached it many years. I'm happy to preach here for this group of 75, 80 scouts. But he said, I have two conditions. Okay, Father Leon, what are they? I want to share with you those two conditions just so that we're all on the same page. He says the first condition is this. He says your homily has to be relevant. He says you just can't speak to the scouts. So, I have a question, and this is going to require audience participation. It's actually a series of questions, so I'm going to ask these questions, and at the end of the questions, you can raise your hand. For the scouts, you do not need to raise your hand. Okay, so all the scouts, keep your hands down. This is for your parents and your relatives and everybody else here. So this is to make sure that my story is relevant today. If you were a scout, and when I say scout, I'm talking daisies, brownies, girls, juniors, Cubs, boys, Sea Scouts, any American Heritage Girl Scouts. If you were a scout in any time of your lifetime, I want you to raise your hand. Not now. Not now. I have a few more questions. So if you were ever a scout, one of these scouts, I want you to raise your hand. If you are a parent of a scout, if you raised one of these scouts, I want you to raise your hand. If you are a grandparent, uncle, or a cousin, I want you to raise your hand. If you were in school and you had a neighbor or a classmate that was a scout, I want you to raise your hand. If you know a scout, if you know a deacon who's a scout, I want you to raise your hand. So, raise your hand if you meet any of those conditions. Great. So, to Father Leon's first question, I say to Father Dave, because Father Dave texted me this, he says, make sure it's relevant. Do you think I've met the condition? Okay, great, okay. Now, the second condition that Father Leon had for me, he said, make your homily short. You know where I'm going. I'm an inquisitive person, so I said to Father Leon, I go, what do you mean by short? Do you mean 5 to 6 minute homily? Or perhaps just shorter than one of your homilies? That's okay. We can all laugh because he's standing in line at one of the Disney World attractions right now. This is a story about the unknown scout. It was the fall of 1909 when an American newspaper man was on a business trip in London, England. William Boyce had become lost in the famed London fog, like the morning fog that we had here, even a little worse, while looking for his office in the city. Nearly at his wit's end, Boyce stopped a young lad and asked for directions. Not only did the lad tell Boyce how to reach his destination, but he also led Boyce there to make certain that the American found his way without being lost again. To show his gratitude, Boyce offered the boy a tip, but he would not accept it. When he asked why, the boy told Boyce he was a Boy Scout and taking a tip would negate the good deed he had done. Inspired by that encounter and the youth's gesture, Boyce embarked on a mission to bring the teachings of Lloyd Baden Powell, the founder of Scouting, back to the United States. Every year during the first week of February, Boy Scouts celebrate their anniversary. So it is no coincidence that we have here today St. Greg's Scouting Community. So we welcome all Scouts. Girls, as I said, girls, daisies, all the way to the Boy Scouts. So we welcome them, and a special welcome to all the parent volunteers who make scouting fun and safe at St. Greg's. So for the parent volunteers, that are entrusted to the care of our scouts. Raise your hands. Let's just celebrate you. Raise your hands. Let's give them a round of applause. While one can spend a considerable amount of time talking about the values of scouting and how they relate to our Christian values and the development of moral certitude, I, however, would like to turn our attention this morning to not to scouting's notable values, but rather to that unknown scout in my story. So here's my question, and perhaps you caught the subtlety as well. Don't you find it interesting that in Boyce's story, we cannot name the scout whose faithfulness in the performance of a daily good deed brought the scouting movement to America? Not his name, his troop, his scout rank, or where he was going when he encountered Boyce are known. Not one of those. All we know is that by this one encounter, by his action to lead a helping hand to a stranger, he forever changed the course of history for scouting in America. A simple act of kindness changed everything. A simple act of kindness changed everything. Coincidentally, the story of the encounter with the unknown scout is where we meet Jesus in Matthew's gospel story. Today we see another unknown character who changed the course of history, the history of salvation. Throughout Mark's narrative, Jesus was unknown and unrecognizable as the Messiah. At first, the people of the day saw Jesus as a healer and an exorcist. His supernatural powers made him a popular sensation with the crowds. Miracles occurred when people encountered this stranger. By the touch of his hand, he brought life, health, speech, strength, and sight. They were the blind, the mute, the lame, the lepers. Those who were lost, the poor and the lonely. They were the strangers whom Jesus came to serve. In today's gospel story, Jesus just left the synagogue in Capernaum where he had driven out an unclean spirit from a man and enters the house of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. When Jesus went to her, he grasped her hand, and the fever immediately left her. What Jesus did for Simon's mother-in-law, he does for us too. Indeed, he extends a hand to each of us, raising us up from sin and death to a new life. His new life in us gives us the grace and gifts to see the needs of others, so we too can respond with a helping hand. Throughout Jesus' ministry, his encounters with those in need, those lost and the hungry, were life-changing. Whether it was his bag of miracles or the staying power of his word, people were drawn to this new way of teaching. And what did Jesus teach? Love versus hate, tolerance versus disapproval, and liberation from the rigid societal norms. Today, those teachings are passed on to us, and we in turn are called to extend our hand to others through our encounters. Sometimes we are called to do big things in life and helping others. And sometimes it's the little day-to-day acts of kindness that are significant and important. Like the unknown scout who refused a tip to help a stranger, St. Paul, who refused any recompense for his ministry too, preached the gospel. And Jesus, who didn't charge money for his cures, we too have an obligation to freely extend our hand when we have encounters with others. For miracles can happen with the power of our example. Yes, we too can preach the gospel by wordless example when we strive to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful. You guys going to help me? All right, we had this planned out. Courteous, kind, Great. Thank you guys for finishing my homily for me. I think Father Dave has a few vocation cards to pass out to you after Mass. So where are we? I think the question for today, for their car ride home is, have you extended your hand to someone today?